Hey guys, it's Jolene and welcome to week 2 of the coronavirus. I hope that you guys are finding ways to make use of this time. They say that it takes about 30 days to make something a habit. So now's the time, right? We're all hunkered down in place and really focusing on things and focusing on different things just as they take up different spaces in our lives. And so now's the time to start flossing and making your bed and stuff like that, right? My spouse and I are going to try to paint around the house. If you have a project that you would like to do, now's the time, right? Start that book that you've been wanting to write. I think it's really important to stay creative in these times because as our movements are restricted, as our lives are restricted in a lot of ways, part of being able to deal with it is being able to be in tune with our creative selves. And so if your creative activities are sometimes in your workplace or outside of the house, building, things like that, it might be important for you and for your mental health to find something creative to do in these times. It's also important to find things to do. So this week I'm going to recommend a book for adults called What is the Bible by Rob Bell. It's exploring how an ancient library of poems, letters, and stories can transform the way you think and feel about everything. So, I mean, that's a big promise, but maybe it will transform the way you think and feel about everything. And for kids this week, God in Between by Rabbi Sandy Eisenberg Sasso. This is a great book, and I think it has a special message for us right now. It talks about God in between, and that's kind of a spoiler alert for the end of the story, that God is found in between us. And so as we are social distancing and really focusing on the space between ourselves, I think this is a really great story and a really kind of positive way to look at what's going on right now, especially for young children. And I think that would be a great way to frame this for them. Leave room for Jesus, right? I want to tell you about my shirt that I'm wearing today. It says Share the Health. It is from No Kid Hungry. It's a gift from Carrie. Thanks, Carrie. And No Kid Hungry is a great organization to give funds to right now because many people are experiencing differences in their lives, and many people rely on workplaces, schools, things like that for food. And especially our children sometimes rely on their school places for food. And with these changes in our patterns and in our lifestyles, it can mean changes in access. So No Kid Hungry is a great organization that really tries to make sure that no kid goes hungry. And they would be a great organization to give money to at this time if you have funds to be able to give away. Okay, so before I go forward with some of my thoughts that I wanted to share for this week, I thought I would also, just plug my website. You can find information about the curriculums that we're using as well as a playlist for these Corona times on my website. And that is www.divergentspiritministries.com. Okay. So what I've been thinking lately is how much this whole coronavirus process and the experience that we're all having really reminds me of the stages of grief that the Elizabeth Kubler-Ross model. And for those of you who are unfamiliar, the stages of grief are denial, anger, bargaining, depression, acceptance. We don't necessarily go through them in that order, and we might kind of bounce around between them. But the goal and the end stage is acceptance. And the stages of grief are kind of applicable not just to death circumstances, but to tough circumstances. They can be applicable to the loss of a job, and I think they are applicable to the coronavirus. I think we have seen people in different stages of this process. And what I would hope that we are journeying into right now is acceptance. So as with all big news, there can be a sense of a journey. And I think that the coronavirus and folks' reaction to it can really be seen as stages of Kubler-Ross's stages of grief. And at first, many of us denied the problem, and folks continue to do what officials warned them not to do. There are still people in that stage right now, unfortunately. Some of our officials, I believe, even kind of denied the problem themselves. So folks are in varying stages of this process, but acceptance is where we need to head. There will be much to grieve during this process. I believe that fully. But I think the trajectory is where we're looking, right? The trajectory, where we want to head. Because once we meet acceptance, then we move out of the stages of grief, and I think we move into transformation. So I feel like acceptance is always the starting place. You can't get where you go if you don't know where you want to go, if you don't know where you are. This means being real about who we are and our situation, because you probably also won't get where you want to go if you aren't honest with where you are and who you are. So I just want to tell a little story. I worked for about 10 years in a retail store. And when we sold expensive items or an expensive purchase and someone paid with a check, we had to go through this process with Equifax to check and make sure that their check was going to go through. I don't know what that looks like today. It's been a minute. So back in the day, we used to take, some information from the check and some personal information from this person and enter it into a machine. And part of what we needed to put in was a birth date. And at one point, there was a woman buying a large purchase, and she was lying about her age. And so her purchase wouldn't go through because she didn't want to be honest about who she was. She needed to be honest before she could move forward. She had to be honest about her age, and we should all be honest about her age. Our spiritual journey is as real as we are. If you're not honest about what you believe and don't believe, what you doubt and trust, what makes you feel good or doesn't, what you need to improve on, and what your gifts are, you won't get anywhere in that spiritual process. It's part of why so many spiritual leaders preach humility, because it requires that kind of radical honesty. And it's also part of why so many people hit a wall in their spiritual journey, is because they're not willing to be honest with the process, or they are resisting something in the process and not really willing to dialogue with that resistance. And then maybe that might not make sense to you if you haven't been at that spot in the spiritual process, but it's a part of it for all of us, I think. So let's be clear, though, that acceptance is not about judgment. It's not about deciding how your life is good or bad, or how you are right or wrong. It's about what is. My living room is a mess right now. It's just what is. I'm about 120 pounds right now. It's just what is. My hair is brown and starting to gray, and it's just what is. So while we accept what is, it doesn't mean that things can't change. It's not, I eat chocolate for dinner every night and that's just how it is. If I'm eating chocolate for dinner every night, that's probably not very healthy. It's probably not in my best interest. But if it's true, it's true. And being honest about that is part of making change. This sense of radical honesty can be hard to master. And it doesn't mean that we abandon tact when we are honest with other people. I think that's important to remember, especially when we're talking about sensitive subjects. It doesn't mean we lapse into negativity. It's having our eyes open, kind of like Adam and Eve had their eyes opened in the garden. It's about honesty. It's about being able to see what is and to form opinions, to form beliefs based on that, and to be forming our worldviews based on what is and not on what we are imagining or want or wish, or about what we're fearful of. It's our joy and burden to see things with mature clarity. I believe that. There's a sense of depth that naivete or unwilling vision can't get to. And without that depth, you also can't get to the depth of your highs, if that makes sense. And that's part of the spiritual journey, right? Is finding the depth of the highs as much as the lows. So accepting how things are starts with you. It starts with your body, with your mind, with your spirit. And it emanates out from yourself to your community, to your world. It doesn't mean that you want things to stay the way they are when you're accepting things. It doesn't mean you want things to change. It doesn't mean you're content. It means you're honest and you're breathing in truth. What is true? And that means that you start to listen to what's true and that you stop listening to lies. You stop listening to lies about yourself, whether you hear them from others or from your own internal monologue. Developing this kind of radical honesty is really hard because it involves developing a sense of discernment in what is negativity, what is naive positivity, what is true. And when you can accept truly how things are in your own life, you can take your power back. You can claim your ability to write your own story, and you don't let your story write you. I think that's an important thing. You want to write your own story. Don't let your story write you. Learning to accept and humble yourself about your body is an exercise in your mind. So when you're focusing on your body and your experience of it, you cultivate an ability to control an aspect of your mind. And in doing so, you will likely find that that ability translates. When you learn to accept your thighs, you learn to accept your typos. And when you learn to accept your typos, you start learning to forgive other people's typos. You learn to forgive your sister for her lazy habits. You learn to forgive drivers on the highway and maybe even some politicians that don't quite think how you wish they did, but who are serving to the best of their abilities and knowledge. Acceptance and commitment to it can lead us to grace. And that's where we all want to get to, right? Is living in the flow of the universe in a way in which we are in harmony with it. That we resist what needs to be resisted, we move around what needs to be moved around, and we go with the flow. And it's how we work toward authenticity. So I hope that this week you will focus in on acceptance and journeying toward it. And perhaps you're in a really different spot on the stages of grief. But keep your eyes on acceptance, because what happens after acceptance is where the transformation happens. And I hope that we all make it through a process of transformation during this time. And those are my hopes for this week. If you'd like to read more or check out my playlist for coronavirus times, or more information about books and curricula that you can use, you can check out divergentspiritministries.com. Thanks, guys. Be well, be safe, and leave room for Jesus.